There's three things that are really important in a business, regardless of whether you want to exit or not. The first is obviously healthy EBITDA and profit, and I would say cash in the current environment. Second is predictable revenue. And I'll clarify what that means, because most people think they have predictable revenue, but they don't. For example, if 40% of your business is on Amazon, Jeff owns that customer, not you. So predictable is repeatable, scalable, repetitive business that I can turn up like a dial. And then the third is obviously rate of growth. That's what venture capitalists do best, right? They buy a heap of shit and bolt it together and off they go. But the first two are really critical for founders to focus on.
Tamara, I'm so pleased that we're able to finally do this. I've been dying to get you on All Us Connected because you talk about something that I think is one of the hardest things to do in business. And we're going to get to that in a moment. But first, I just wanted to say thank you. And also, it was such a delight to meet you. You know, I was an admirer from afar. I saw a couple of your videos of your speaking engagements, and I know you're very in demand for your speaking. And I was really impressed by your system and how you think about this, and how well it's been received by executives and founders and investors of growth stage businesses.
Thank you. And firstly, for everyone who's listening, I'm not a professional speaker. I have been building and exiting businesses for a long time. So you see trends, right? And I think what's beautiful is for everybody to come together and share what they do best for, all boats rise. So yeah, I love to speak in front of fellow peers, and really share my zone of genius so that they can, avoid some of the battle scars that we see too often in business.
Right. Well, I want to get to we're going to get to some of the things in a moment, but maybe we can take a minute on talking about some of the things that you learn. And of course, we're both in YPO. Peer learning is a critical part of what makes YPO great. You've been an enormous contributor to networks and forums and chapters around the country and around the world, actually. But let's start a little bit about your background. How did you come to what were the hard-learned lessons? Tell us a little bit about how you got from A to B and to where we are now.
Well, yes, definitely a lot of lessons, right? That first 10 years, it's quite interesting. But entrepreneurship was certainly not something that was even on my radar as a child. I come from a creative background. So, I started in marketing. That's what I studied in university. And never would have thought about becoming an entrepreneur, owning businesses, raising capital, none of that. So it's been very organic. It's not your traditional route. But when I graduated university and went into an agency, I instantly hated the model. I didn't like the egos. I didn't like the vanity metrics as well. I was like, hang on. So you're going to show them a heap of impressions and look over here, but we're actually not. What's the ROI? What's the CPA? What's the LTV? What's the AOV? There wasn't a lot of attention on that. So I didn't last long in that environment, as you can imagine, Paul. And it was actually one of my clients who said to me, look, why don't you go out on your own and start your own agency? So that was my first, I wouldn't say that was entrepreneurship. Now, as I reflect, that was more self-employment, because the business still depended on me. It wasn't an asset, because if I sold it, if you sell any agencies nowadays, you're stuck in earnouts, key person risk, low multiples. So that was my first introduction to peer learning, which you alluded to, that I'm a bit of an addict. And the reason being is because that has been the single point, and execution, obviously. The single point of my success is being exposed to what you don't know. And my first forum said to me, look, your business isn't an asset. It depends on you. We're all playing golf, And I said, well, what are the options? And they introduced me to a thing called sweat equity. And at the time, I was working with a lot of mergers and acquisition houses, and they would be bringing me businesses so that I could create predictable revenue models for them in preparation for an exit. And there's three things that are really important in a business, regardless of whether you want to exit or not. The first is obviously healthy EBITDA and profit, and I would say cash in the current environment. Second is predictable revenue. And I'll clarify what that means because most people think they have predictable revenue, but they don't. For example, if 40% of your business is on Amazon, Jeff owns that customer, not you. So predictable is repeatable, scalable, repetitive business that I can turn up like a dial. And then the third is obviously rate of growth. And that's what venture capitalists do best, right? They buy a heap of shit and bolt it together and off they go. But the first two are really critical for founders to focus on. So I was working with M&A houses, coming in and helping them with their predictable revenue, making them highly profitable, and then they get a great exit. And my forum said to me, this is 10 years into business. Why don't you do that for yourself? And at the time, and still, women don't get a lot of access to capital. So I started buying businesses that were turnarounds. And now that I'm in my late 40s, I turnarounds are hard work if you've ever done one. But, I was in my early 30s, so I had the energy. And so I would buy these dogs, as they would call them, but they'd have really great foundations. They were just mismanaged businesses. So I would, that actually got me into YPO. I acquired a business, grew it to over 20 mil in revenue and exited that and then started doing that, which led to YPO saying, what does it look like with capital? So hanging around VCs and funds that were 200 mil plus. So each evolution and each part of the journey has not been me going, I'm going to be an investor and a growth advisor. It was very much based on the people that I had around me and leveraging my zone of genius and my talents in order to create assets, not just a salary.
Mhm. I love that comment about not an entrepreneur, but really just self-employed. I've always felt that the term entrepreneur is a bit of a trick because it feels like marketing, to convince
Mhm.
people to take undue risk. And actually, one of the things that I think is essential there are a lot of different ways to choose to engage in business. The venture capital model, which is really looking for very, very rapidly scaling businesses that can create enormous value. And most of them don't work because if you choose to do that, you're certainly not thinking about cash flow in the same way as a company that is making profitable. I had a transition where I would only let people call me a business owner because I felt that if they called me an entrepreneur, it was leading the witness, as it were.
Yeah, or a Swiss Army knife, because when you're growing things, you have to be able to jump in and solve problems. And this is the next bottleneck, and this is the next bottleneck. I think Shark Tank made entrepreneurship look way more sexier than what it is. You lose more than you win. And I think the core issue that I see is that you'll try 100 things, 99 things will be wrong, but that one thing that you land that could be your predictable revenue that you can go deep and narrow on, that's a really good business, not these wide businesses that keep going, oh, well, let's just sell this to add more revenue in this. And they become very complicated and they end up mediocre at everything. They go wide. But going very deep and narrow on something that, is repeatable, scalable, fast growth is great. But most people give up at number 20, Paul. They don't get to the 100. So, being able to, especially in the environment of AI and offshoring, we can now split test 100 things a lot quicker and a lot more affordable than we ever used to be able to do it. So that's kind of making up for this lack of runway that I would say that entrepreneurs that call themselves entrepreneurs have at the moment, which is they just don't wait to find that one thing. They give up very quickly or they run out of capital.
Or they run out of capital. Well, and that this is an interesting AI is part of it, but what is also true today, which was certainly not true when I got going, and frankly, it was even. I mean, I'm older than you are, so but even when you got going, it was a similar problem. The starting condition can be known in a way that was never true before. So you could, today you don't have to actually quit your job. You can actually do all the research and know everything about an area, an opportunity, a market, competition, the ecosystem. All of it's available if you're a good researcher. And now it's even easier with AI because uh, you know, DeepSeek and so on are incredibly good researchers. And I think that balance of having a vision, but at the same time being able to take in information to adjust that vision, which is really the trying the 99 things, is the first critical skill that a founder needs to be able to have an opportunity to scale. Um, but let's jump to something else that one of the things that uh, I was really impressed with because it's such a rare thing to see, and you have a system for it that I thought was very clever. Companies regularly, and this is becoming more true, and with all the craziness that's going on in the world today, and the uncertainty that accompanies so much of what people are, touching everybody. Um, if you have a business that's growth stage or middle market, and you're trying to figure out how to grow faster, or in some cases, grow at all, right? And you're trying to do it out of cash flow. That's one of the hardest things there is to do in business, I believe, because um, what has gotten you here is not going to get you there. And typically, companies, certainly venture-backed companies, have said, "Well, let's just raise another round," which is now, depending on the sector you're in, is either completely unavailable or is very difficult. But for plenty of folks who have cash flowing businesses that are, by any measure successful, but they're looking for this next leg and figuring out how to make it work out of cash flow, that's a very, very challenging thing. And I think you have a really, really interesting approach to how to, or a framework for thinking about how to make that possible. Can you describe a little of what you figured out?
Yeah, certainly. Well, firstly, I don't think it's a bad thing that capital is hard to come by at the moment because I felt like it was the lazy option for a long time. And, capital is raising capital and equity is the most expensive way to grow. And to me, it has to be quite strategic. So, yes, there's a lack of capital around at the moment. And then, secondly, people are saying that they haven't got the cash flow to invest in growth, which is BS because they're sitting on it. It's just they haven't looked properly at their business in the lens of being agile. So again, because I come from a finance background, I like to keep things simple, and we look at things in red, blue, black. So red is everything you need in the business that to run it, but doesn't drive growth. So finance, accounting, HR, compliance, reporting, all of that sort of stuff. IT, you need those things to run it, but they don't generate revenue. Blue is everything that drives revenue, which is your sales, marketing, lead gen, brand awareness, that sort of thing. And I would argue that most CEOs think that their job is to manage and the red and the blue. And being the CEO, your number one job is to own your growth. And I would argue that most businesses don't own their growth. Whereas when I ask a group of CEOs and founders, what is your core job? They say strategy, culture, all of these things, they're important. But the number one thing that they need to focus on is owning their growth. So that's the blue. And then the black is that how are we going to drive this growth very deep and narrow? What is our strategy? But if you look at start with the black, where are we trying to go? Everybody is zigging like sag, right? Now's the opportunity, really. From here on in, there's tremendous amounts of opportunity if you can free up cash and get your predictable revenue model working for you to acquire and to grow deep into markets. Whereas most people are sitting on their hands at the moment, as you know. So black is where do we want to go? What's our BHAG and how do we get there strategically? Then we look at the red And inside the red, you can AI, automate, and offshore. They need to be kept to an absolute minimum cost and highly efficient. So that's when those levers come in. And I'm not talking, obviously, AI is for everybody. It should be part of the culture and ingrained in every department. But with offshoring, it's also about upskilling, not just about cheap labor. So it's about how do we have A-team players. So we can usually go into a business that's over 40 million revenue and find at least $2 million of savings and upskilling opportunities through AI and offshoring in the red. Then what we can do is we can take that capital, and remember, number one was healthy EBITDA and profit. We can take half of those savings, say $1 to $2 million, put that on the bottom line, because cash is king. Because one day strategically we're going to go shopping, right? And we can acquire companies that aren't thinking strategically and are sitting on their hands. So we're going to put that to the bottom line because cash is king at the moment. And then we're going to invest some of those savings into building in-house marketing, sales, lead gen teams. Most people don't own their growth. They either have a CMO that they expect to be the master of all trades, or they have an agency, or both, and they blame both. But I blame the founder because they don't own their growth. It's not built in-house, it's not predictable, and it's not scalable. And that is a huge opportunity. And when people say to me they don't have capital, Paul, I go, give me a day under the hood and I'll find you the capital you need.
Yeah, that's powerful. And of course, so much of that, founders in particular, are spinning plates all the time. And if you have a plate that seems to be nice and stable, you don't go back to look at it, but there's often an opportunity. Say more about, let's talk about the red again. Let's take a moment on those areas where there's an opportunity to free up cash and also often make those functions work better. So remind me of what those are again.
So AI, offshoring, and automation is critical in the red. What's good about the red is it's fairly black and white. It's ticking boxes, it's processes, those sorts of things. It's making sure that it's HR, accounting, compliance, if you need to have legal counsel, all those sorts of things. IT. So those things, anything that doesn't drive revenue for your business. So think about those red departments that you have, and then think about how you can get that to at least 90% AI or offshored or automated. That's really critical. In your exec team, which sits in the black, you might have a fractional CFO or a COO that overlooks the red department, but in general, that department should be lean and highly efficient. So when we look at every single department and we look at the structure of our talent, we have our green people at the bottom, right, that are level ones, right? I believe, and I've been saying this for a long time, and I think now people are starting to go, maybe she's not a mad Aussie. There is that bottom layer will be wiped out by AI agents. And that's mostly what people are hiring offshore, is this low-level talent. But we don't touch that because we know that we can come in and create AI agents for that first level. The second level up, which is people with 5 years of experience, they can easily be swapped out. I call it ATO, attrition to offshoring, or automated those roles. So really making sure we have strong SOPs, strong data rooms, and people who can operate them using AI and automation. So that's the next level, 5-year plus. The one above that is your 10-year plus, which can also be offshored. So I offshore most of those roles inside the red. And then there might be a fractional CFO and a COO that sits on top of that. Then I go into the blue department, and the same thing applies, AI agents. But then instead of using agencies, rather than paying a retainer for that agency fee, how do we bring in and create a team in-house that can complete all of those tasks, your ongoing content creation, SEO and GEO, social media management, and so on. The only cadence I say to this is you have outside partners for your media buying optimization. So this is about strategic partners like with you around, you're the expert at what you do. I'm the engine room for the marketing, but I need access to your intel around optimizing my media spend. And then above that is a fractional CMO. So I just had I was just speaking to somebody who has a fitness company. They're doing about 120 million, and they hired a VP of marketing, and she wants to hire a, a growth advisor in house. $320,000 is the asking price in San Fran for that role. I'm like, okay, do you know how much activity? Activity equals outcome. You know that, Paul. Do you know how much activity I can get from experts in marketing with 10-year plus experience? I can create a whole team for that budget. So I don't know what this person is doing, but really I only need access to them strategically. I don't need them ongoing. So you've got to think about everything in your levels and know that the bottom level's being wiped out by AI agents. We want to upskill at the next level at 5 and 10 years, and then we want to have somebody on the top that's fractional. And the reason this is important is because I can go really fast. Once I find that one thing, I can go very fast and deep and narrow very quickly because I can expand that team really quickly. Whereas most people onshore, with everything that's happening, with the environment, the volatility of it, they don't want to get married. They don't want to invest 320K on one body. They don't want to hire somebody not knowing what their future environment looks like. By creating this model, you can expand and contract within 30 days. I just keep my core onshore team and I can wipe out all the things underneath it and go back to the core if the shit hits the fan, right? I can regroup. Right, what's our new strategy? What's our new direction? Go back into the black, figure that out, and then start testing, building, optimizing. And then once we have it, go deep again and expand that middle section out, which is the execution. And that's the number one thing I find, having built and exited businesses in America for over 20 years now, is failure to execute. There's just no one to execute, or if they do, they're not 18 players. They're not the best people in the game. So it's very hard for them to compete against me.
So when you're looking at these non-revenue generating functions and you look at offshoring that, what sort of savings typically can you find in a company? Let's take a $50 million business. What percentage of reduction can you get and still have the type of capabilities that allow you to execute?
So the first thing we do is we take the job description for the onshore role, and then we look to upskill that. So why have a bookkeeper when you can have a certified accountant? Now, when you're looking at the people offshore, you need to make sure that they're not, you've got to headhunt them. So we only do 5 and 10, ideally 10-year plus experience, people who've worked for private and publicly listed American companies in the Philippines. So if you talk about red accounting, we go and poach people from Deloitte's, PwC, that have their head offices in Manila. These people have been with them for 10 years. They're corporate America through and through. They're very experienced. And so you can look at a 10-year plus, you're looking at about between 3,500 and 4,500 a month, all inclusive. Now, what would you pay for a certified accountant onshore with 10-year plus experience? It would cost you way more than that. The issue that everybody has is because you haven't been to the Philippines and you haven't been utilizing the talent there for 25 years like I have, is everybody's just going for this low-level talent. They're missing the opportunity of going and finding the people that have done their time in corporate America that are looking for their next job career path. And what we do is we are really focused on work-life balance. Funnily enough, they want the same thing. They're commuting 3 hours a day. They're inside this large organization, and I give them an offer they can't refuse. I say to them, come work for me. I'm going to put you in an exciting private business in America. You can work from home, but the exchange is that you work to American hours, and it has to work that way. They have to be on your hours. They have to be doing your holidays and sitting in a Zoom room like they would any other remote team member onshore. So that's really critical. And then we extend healthcare to them and their children. So job security is really important for them. Healthcare is really important. And that work life balance. So they work evenings. And to be honest, when COVID happened, I think the people who won were the employees. They all got this flexibility and working from home and this remote hybrid workforce. We didn't leverage it at all as CEO and founders. Most people didn't. So why aren't we thinking global, not territory, but talent? Where can we find cheap, agile talent so that we can drive our growth and 18 players drive growth? Where can we do that globally in the current hybrid workforce environment? And because everyone's spoken to a call center person or had a bad offshoring experience, they think that it doesn't work, but it actually does. You just got to shop. You get what you pay for, right? So it's very much about that headhunting. But 3.5 to 4.5 versus, I mean, what's that? 45, 50,000 a year versus 300, 250, 300 onshore. And you're stuck with them like marriage. And then you've got the HR issues.
Yep. Well, we found this to be true too. There's, my wife was president of a company called Andela, and their line, they brought African programmers to U.S. companies. And their tagline, which I thought was great, was brilliance is distributed evenly. And, there's incredible talent in Africa, obviously, like there is everywhere on the planet. I mean, if you have a mechanism to be able to find it, what you're describing makes a lot of sense too, which is they've been trained, inculcated in these cultures, the corporate culture of America and the American companies and so on. We've had great experience working with folks from the Philippines, and we have a large office in Tel Aviv in our other business, and also in Kyiv, Ukraine. So,
Yeah.
and these people are exceptional. And so we would not be able to do anything without it.
Well, you can make decisions quicker, right? If you know you have an opportunity and you can take market share and you know that there's a 30-day pivot if it doesn't work. I mean, our job as CEOs and founders is to own our growth and figure out how to do that aggressively when everybody else isn't, and reduce the risk around that. Entrepreneurs are seen as people who are high risk takers, but I'm the breadwinner in my family. Like, I was taking very calculated risks, and the fact that I know that I can reduce that workforce in 30 days if I need to is makes it a lot easier for me to take that leverage, and to take that next step. And I think the other reason why I landed on the Philippines is because their university and schooling systems are identical to America. So there's not this training gap, that I need to fill in when we're talking about, finance and things like that. Plus, they're the number one consumers of American social outside of America, which is hilarious.
Well, also, yeah, totally. So that's a fascinating idea. So the idea is to do a review of what is, essentially your full P&L.
Yep, red, blue, black assessment. Mhm.
And you go through and you guys have a process for that. How long does that take? A week or two, a month? How long does it take?
We spend a day on site. We look at org structure, we look at the growth, and we map out the growth plan as well. So I'm, growth advisor. That's the bit I love. But we do look at the red departments, and then we spend time with the CEO and founder on the opportunities and what is the black. So we'll spend a day on site, a separate conversation with the CEO and founder, and we come back with a full report and a full itemized budget, which shows here are the savings. This is what we can AI offshore in the red. This is how much we can put to the bottom line. This is freed up budget now for us to build an in-house marketing team so we own our growth. And then we effectively come in, rather than just giving you soft warm bodies, which most BPOs do, it's kind of a co-managed service meets the team component. So we come in for the first 6 months on the blue, 3 months to build out the team and the predictable revenue model, then 3 months on optimizing that to get to those magic numbers that we spoke about that most people don't know. So every group of CEOs and founders, first question I say is, do you own your growth? Yeah, sure I do. Okay, what's your magic numbers? It's not a lot of answers. So we come in for that first 6 months and set it all up, and then we step away. So you have our EGS processes, which are our growth systems. We plug those into your business so we can hit the ground running. There's best practices in how you do this stuff. We plug that in, we plug in the team, we get it up and running, and then we step away and you own your growth. And a lot of people are coming to us about 12 to 18 months out from an exit. And we work with a lot of private equity firms as well, because they want to maximize the value. So if we come in and build that, what we find is when they go to market, they might have 3 LOIs on that company. When they do due diligence and they see that it's an engine room in-house with SOPs and it's all scalable, then it becomes a fun bidding war. And they usually end up getting 2 to 3 points more for that business on a multiple, which is significant just by doing this work, by owning their growth. So I would argue, Paul, that a lot of people are leaving money on the table if they don't have that piece sorted out, and it doesn't take long to do it. It's just a, it's a conscious decision to focus on growth, and make sure that their numbers are optimized, just like what you do. You come in and you look at that optimization as a partner and optimize that. So when people are complaining about, tariffs and the rising wages and all these things, there is bleed. There is bleed in media buying, there is bleed in teams. So that is the opportunity, is run a tight ship, make sure it's really lean, optimized, and scalable.
Yeah. Let's talk about some examples. I think it would help our listeners to hear, maybe no names, but give us an example of a company that you have worked with, and what you found, and the results that you were able to make. Because I think it's a fascinating, this idea of making sure that you don't take for granted the expense level you have, and then using those, freeing up those dollars is such a big idea. But let's run through a couple examples.
Yeah, certainly. So let's look at two. One was a direct to consumer business, but high ticket item, so around $200,000. They had 3 agencies they were using on retainer for different things, from SEO to social media to ad campaigns. They had an in-house team of very green people, straight out of university, not a huge amount of context, which I will add I'm concerned about in the future, because AI doesn't work unless you have context. It's all about the prompting, right? So you really do need the 5, 10-year plus people on your team in order to leverage AI so that they're asking the right questions. So we went in and did an audit on the team. What we did was we upskilled the in-house team. So we went from the green roles to 10-year plus. We hired a full stack marketer, a digital marketer, a video editor, which was very important for GEO at the moment, SEO and GEO, and a content creator, right? So that team of 4 could work across all the functions that they were outsourcing to agency. So in general, they had a $65,000 a month budget for their agency and green in-house team. We were able to supercharge that quite dramatically in skills and bringing it in-house. So we're going from 5 hours all that you get from your agency to now 40 hours per person. And we're able to save them about 25 grand on that. So that went down to around the 40 grand mark for that team per month. What's more important is not just the savings. Within a very short amount of time, we were able to get their cost per acquisition, their cost per acquisition down from $138 to under $50, which is significant. And we're able to get their lead gen from, they were doing around 40 a week to over 100 a week in leads in a very short amount of time. What we found, which is really interesting, but I always say you're welcome, is the next issue was the salespeople weren't closing well. So we had to come in and then we built out the sales team, because people don't think you can sell offshore. They think it needs to be somebody onshore. So what we did was we created a split test off to the side, and we said, look, you think it can't be done, that's fine. But I'd like to take that challenge, and it's only a 3-month challenge. So why don't we benchmark your existing sales team. We're bringing all these leads in now at the top of the funnel. You're ranking really high. We're reducing our sales cycle. Now that's the next thing, is we need to reduce our sales cycle, but we're increasing our leads. Let's have a look at what it looks like to split test it against your existing team. So we benchmarked them on how long to close, their close rate, all of that sort of stuff, their magic numbers. And then we built a team off to the side that it was an older customer avatar. They were over the age of 60. So they like to be heard. They want to spend time talking and going through the process. Onshore salespeople were like, just get me off the call, right? They're obviously not going to buy. So our offshore team was spending on average over half an hour with each customer. Remember, it's a $200,000 sale. Over half an hour with that customer. So they had longer call times and high conversions, and they 4x the sales of the team onshore. So that would be my thing, is even if you say, I don't think it's possible, just run a split test. It's a 3-month investment to build a small sales team or customer service team offshore, and to split test that against your onshore team. And the numbers don't lie. We just did that for another company that needed their clients are buying on the weekend. It was costing them a fortune for staff onshore. So we put a roster on for the weekend, split test them against each other, and we came out on top across all metrics. But the interesting thing that was the cost saving wasn't the wages. So stop thinking about wages, because we want to upskill and get quality people. Yes, there's some savings in offshoring with wages, but these guys are far more experienced and they don't expect commission. So how much are you paying in commission? So as soon as I added that back into the mix, and they said, well, how do we reward these people? I said, they meet their KPIs to keep their job. If they go above that, throw them $50 or $100 a month. That will be sufficient. So if it's interesting, because most people are thinking, okay, it's just about the wages. I need to get it as cheap as possible. Think about investing in quality people and see what the return is in results, as opposed to just, salary.
Fascinating. I'm just thinking of some examples that we've seen. And you have situations where there are very, very capable teams in-house, frankly. I mean, they don't always have to be bad, right? But it could still be a high cost basis. Have you done models where you've gone in and selectively replaced certain folks and so on to work with the mixing of offshoring and an onshore team in some of these mid-level roles?
Yeah, well, we call it pods, right? So you might keep your 18 players onshore, but what we're asking them to do is do no more execution. Your job is now, if you're a B2B, is being client-facing, quality assurance, and managing your pod on the execution. So really, no one should be picking up any tools onshore. That's really their new role, is to transition to that, because then I can 3x their activity. And the number one issue with great people, and we all know this, I do this to my own team, is you have somebody capable, they end up with no bandwidth, right? Because you're giving them all the important stuff to get done. So bandwidth is an issue for them. So if you can free them up, I call it the 80-20, 80-10-10 rule. 80% of their time client-facing, quality assurance, managing the team, and focusing on the growth goals for the company, the onshore should be doing. Right? And then 10% is managing the team. And then I give them 10% of their time back. They're usually working long hours. So I say, you know what? Offshoring is actually going to free you up. If we create this pod underneath you to do all the execution, it's going to free you up as well. So most of my people onshore in the US finish and pick up the kids and then jump back on email later on in the day, which it's got to be a win-win, right, for them. But most of them are complaining about bandwidth and lack of time to execute. Would you agree with that?
100%. And, it's interesting because, well, as you're right, the more capable people end up getting more, you max them out. They can't really get to the most important things.
It's not fun for them and it's not fun for us. We're frustrated because we're entrepreneurs and we have a vision, and they're frustrated because they're kind of burning out. We're burning them out because they're capable. So it's a good option to create pods.
Yeah, I think what we've seen again and again is that if this idea of being able to take highly capable people and executives make it a force multiplier with a combination of mostly we certainly use AI extensively through our organization. So you want to make sure people know how to do that. But I think, but this idea of being able to get more capable people who are, being held to the same or a higher standard than others, and it works out really well. And the idea of being able to flex up and down is important in these times. You never know.
Yeah. It's paralyzing otherwise. It really is at the moment.
Yeah, it's very, very tricky. I mean, it's interesting. We're certainly seeing. I mean, there's obviously some folks are really, rightly so, trying to figure out if you have a business that's bringing in a lot of product from overseas, you have a really, really challenging problem, and a problem that, frankly, has been something that more or less has not risen to the executive level. You've people worked out what your landed cost was, and that was the end of it. But with that level of uncertainty creates all kinds of weirdness in people's businesses. But it does speak to the importance of this, and we see this again and again. This is, self-inflicted, right? I mean, it's an odd situation to be in, but frankly, it happens, right? I mean, this is the nature of people's business lives.
COVID happened,
COVID happens, exactly.
those that were prepared and were online, digital, already set up with remote workforces, they're the ones who excelled.
Or they move quickly. Like, plenty of people weren't prepared, but they acted quickly. They didn't panic. They just got in there and figured it out. But I think these playbooks that you're describing are really good to know in advance. And I don't, what is right? Everybody, people, the old model, which is the old Jack Welch model, which, frankly can be gamed as well, was the old, cut off the bottom 10%, which is not the smart way to do what you're describing. But this idea of being smart about trying to find efficiencies, revisiting things, and trying to figure out how to free up cash to be able to allow you to take the next step is critical. Because, one of the things that we've seen, and I know you've seen as well, when startups are little, they obviously have an enormous amount of terminal risk, right? They go down all the time. And that's the nature of it. Sometimes you just, it's the wrong product market fit or a variety of other things. They're very, very fragile. But actually, growth stage businesses are really fragile too. Even middle market businesses, you can get really surprised. They get to a size where it feels like, is very, very stable, but that's a dangerous place to sit. You want to be able to apply what you're describing, one of a variety of different ways to think about how to streamline operations to be able to enable the next leg.
Well, the smart founders are tapping into people like us who have looked under so many hoods so that we have reference points of what works and what doesn't. And if we're getting back to that de-risking model, the fact that you and I have looked under so many businesses and seen what works and what doesn't, that automatically eliminates a heap of things. So when they partner with people like us, the great thing is that I'm not coming in and going, I have an idea. I'm saying I've run this strategy before in other businesses that are almost identical to you. And so therefore the probability of this working is a lot higher. And we're going to come in and customize it to your customer avatar, your industry, and your product, right? So we can hit the ground running with that. The same with you. You're looking at data. You've looked at so many businesses. You know what works and what doesn't. It's about this, how do we hit the ground running really quickly based on best practices? And how do we make sure that we're reading the numbers the whole way through to make sure we're winning? And then reporting that back to the CEO and founder. So if somebody, I don't know about you, but if I meet a founder and they go, loved your presentation, I really want to own my growth, can I introduce you to my CMO? I'm like, no, I don't work with CMOs because most of the time they're not commercially minded. I need buy-in from the top, and I report to the top on how the growth is going because they need to own their growth, and I will collaborate with your CMO. There's a huge difference. So having that buy-in to own your growth at the top and knowing who their strategic partners are that are going to be critical and driving that, they're the sorts of people that you and I can win for every day of the week.
That's right. And it's interesting. I think there are a lot of different types of CMOs. As you know, there are folks who are CMOs or CROs who are fully capable of running the business and get this. And actually, in their defense, I think a critical part of this is that if you have a line responsibility within an organization, your responsibility is to make sure that that part is working as best as it can. And the coordination across all the components falls to the CEO or the president.
They're set up to fail half the time. They don't get the right resources. They don't have the right partners. I mean, no offense. I don't go to my doctor and ask him for open heart surgery and a knee reconstruction. Set those CMOs up to win. Otherwise,
Right. Well, and that's exactly right. And this comes back to right data.
but the problem is the CMOs aren't given the approval to be able to do this. So you have to tell what the CMO's been telling the founder for a long time. I need access to these sorts of partners. I need access to these sorts of resources because I need a heart surgeon, a knee surgeon, and this and a that, because we all know how specialized marketing is. And the founder looks at it from an onshore point of view and goes, well, that's $1 million team. And then they say no to the CMO. So our job is to come in and show them a path for how the CMO can be set up to win on an affordable budget and get the approval from the founder and make sure that he's part of the process so he can see how it works to empower that CMO to win.
Right. So it's not just delegating it across. And data, obviously.
No, you don't throw it over the fence.
Right. No, don't throw it over the fence. And then data, which is obviously the other critical part. We've seen this again and again too, and we've had some really interesting conversations about this in the past. If you do not have a single source of truth that's accurate, you can't learn and improve because you don't know what good is, because you can't see it in the numbers. And so, a critical part of this, particularly for consumer-facing businesses who are spending media dollars, which is essentially a money furnace, you have to have the ability to be able to see what's going on.
Yeah, I read a stat recently that 40% of ad spend is lost because of attribution and lack of data. So misattribution, everybody claiming the attribution, and then the data not being correct. So that single source of truth, there's 40% in savings right there. I mean, that pays for the strategic partner. Anything above that is going to be icing on the cake. So again, if you're not a strategic CEO and founder with an agile team and focused on growth, then it's going to be a bit of a struggle in the next couple of years.
Yeah. And of course, the other side of that coin is, as you correctly point out, companies who navigate well here and are aggressively invest where on a risk adjusted basis, which is critical. It's actually, and maybe we'll end with that, but I think it's just a really wise point you made. I actually think most of the most successful entrepreneurs are often not big risk takers, or if they're taking a risk,
Right.
They're being very, very specific about it. And they're de-risking everything else around it because you don't want to have multiple risks. You want to try to be smart about it. And in fact, for growth stage businesses, often this is about de-risking and making sure that you're not teetering, right? Where if you have a macro event that occurs, you're really going to be in trouble. And the stuff you're describing is really so essential to that.
Well, I talk about it in magpies and eagles. So I'll explain that to you just as a bit of an analogy.
Yeah.
So entrepreneurs in general like shiny objects, magpies, right? And those are the businesses that really hover between 1 and 10 million because they're constantly being distracted by the next shiny object, right? If you've ever seen a magpie's nest, it's got lots of shiny things that make up the nest. It's a dog's breakfast, but and it's pretty much what their businesses look like, right? What you're talking about is what I call the disciplined founder and CEO, the intentional CEO and founder, and they really like predictable, boring things. They do the same thing over and over again and get really good at it and take market share. Those are the eagles. They're up here knowing exactly where they can see where they're going. They can see the vision. They're very on target. They barely do you see an eagle going for something and then going, oh, hang on, I'm just going to go over here and pick up this shiny object. They're very focused. But when they need to, they can swoop down and do what they need to do, grab the resources, the talent, the partners. They can swoon in, get something sorted quickly, and then go back up. So eagle businesses are worth a lot more than magpie businesses. So that's really what magpies sell to VCs, eagles sell to PEs and institutional. And that's really where the money is on exits. So whilst it's fun being a magpie, I think we need more eagles at the moment.
Yes, we do. We do. Well, that's a perfect place to end. Thank you so much, Tamara. Really, really grateful for you
Oh,
making
thank
time.
you.
It's
I love
fascinating.
that you get
And
it. We could talk for hours, right? You
I
just
know,
get
right?
it.
Exactly. Very good.